Today's episode is brought to you by the Dave Bullis Podcast. Hello and welcome to Film Pro Productivity, the podcast that helps film professionals and other creative people, all creative people really, to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 50, Imposter Syndrome. Well, look at that. Here we are at a very grand milestone indeed for Film Pro Productivity, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules and joining me here today on this very special show. I'm not going to launch this one with any grand fanfare though, as next week's episode is not only the final show of this season, but it is also the New Year's special. I'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but first, let me look back at the last show, which was all about outrage culture, a blight on the modern world if ever there was one. In that show, I shed light on a grand manipulation pulled by strings held by the world media. It's called outrage porn, and it's available to listen to right now, so if you have a few minutes to spare and you haven't heard it yet, go back and check it out. Now, Albert Einstein once said, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler." And that feeling, spoken by a man that most today would regard as an unprecedented genius, is a very good example of how imposter syndrome manifests itself. I often have to remind myself that the topics I cover here, some of which I have been thinking of for many years, are often entirely new concepts to many listeners. The term imposter syndrome was coined in the late 70s by psychologists Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes and described the feeling that high achievers have when they cannot recognise their success and are afraid of being exposed as a fake. According to those doctors, it can be identified in three ways. 1, feeling a fraud and being afraid of being found out. 2, attributing success to anything but your own achievements. And 3, downplaying your achievements. The term imposter syndrome is interchangeable for imposter phenomenon, fraud syndrome, or imposter experience, but I'm going to refer to it today as imposterism. Imposterism is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as, in inverted commas, a fraud. Imposterism can be debilitating, causing stress, anxiety, low self-confidence, shame, and in some cases depression. But perhaps the most damaging part of dealing with imposter syndrome is that it can limit our courage to go after new opportunities, explore potential areas of interest, and put ourselves out there in a meaningful way. I've touched upon it before in my Season 1 episode entitled The Inner Critic, but today I want to get very specific about what this is, how it limits and damages us, and what we can do to overcome it. A recent study noted that 70% of successful people had experienced feelings of imposter syndrome in their lives. And as it's only the most awesome and highly successful people on the planet that listen to this show, I figured that this episode would be particularly relevant to you today. Initial studies on this phenomenon were focused on women, but over the years there have been many more, and it's now very evident that the problem of imposterism is something that, to an extent, affects all genders and all ethnicities. Even now, in my quiet moments, I suspect that I'm going to one day walk onto a film set to discover that I just don't know what I'm doing, and that someone of importance there is going to ask me to leave and bring in someone to replace me. Over the years, I have very often dodged the bullet of direct praise too by bouncing it off onto others that have been involved in whatever project that's going on. I'm simply not comfortable with praise. I find it kind of embarrassing and try to slink away from it when it's offered. And I don't mean to be rude when this happens. I just don't really like being in the limelight anymore. Maybe once I did. When I was acting on stage, I did maybe get a kick out of it, but not these days. Mostly, though, I've been able to control these feelings. It took me years and years, but I can now say pretty confidently that I not only know what I'm doing in as much as it is possible to do so, but that I'm really very good at what I do, and I do deserve the payments and the accolades which I've had over the years. It's hard for me to say that without sounding arrogant, but I'm going to stand by it. The pressure of not wanting to sound like I'm full of myself or arrogant, especially since I've worked with many people who really were arrogant, and I don't want to appear to others as they appear to me, is something that I do struggle with, though. I always find that it's easier for someone else to announce how wonderful you are rather than for you to do it yourself. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't believe in yourself, of course. A couple of things have happened to me recently which have strengthened my self-belief. The first was pretty simple. Partly due to my role here as host on this podcast, I came to the realisation that everything doesn't have to be perfect, just good enough. That knowledge takes the pressure off feeling like I'm expected to know it all and to be perfect, which is good news indeed for a recovering perfectionist like myself. I have an affirmation that I use these days, and I talked about affirmations a few episodes ago, and I do still use them. Although in the context I was talking about them there, I was talking about using them to kind of redirect your life and rebuild your values, etc. It's definitely worth a listen. Go back and check it out if you missed it. But the one that I use right now is that I can only see so far. That no matter how hard I plan, I may still have to adapt on the day. This is kind of specific to fight direction to an extent, or even just production of sorts. This realization that you can only see so far takes the pressure of perfectionism off of everything that I do, but it still allows me to plan in detail what I am going to do, if that makes sense. Secondly, and I kind of hate going on about this, but I got treated very badly a couple of times this year, and I've had to change my outlook and my way of working quite considerably as a result. As I mentioned numerous times this season, it actually resulted in my giving up on filmmaking, which I'd been doing for 12 years. But there's only so much a person can take, and I had just had it. Being looked down upon by idiots who have little or no understanding of matters on which I am an expert got me so annoyed that I finally called them out, and when that happened, the switch flipped in my head, and I realised, wait a minute here, I am the expert here, not them. I won't allow myself to be treated as an inferior again as a result of those experiences. And so I am working hard to subdue my feelings of imposterism and stand up for my rights. A few episodes ago, I also tackled the subject of bullying, and you may have to use some of the advice from that show yourself to get back control if you feel that you are in a similar situation. Now, Jodie Foster famously suffers from this. She passed me once at the Cannes Film Festival and smiled in my general direction, by the way. It's just an aside, but I feel like I know her now. But she famously said, when I won the Oscar, I thought it was a fluke. I thought everybody would find out and they'd take it back. They'd come to my house knocking on the door saying, excuse me, we meant to give that to someone else. That was going to be for Meryl Streep, unquote. And that's a really common theme with imposterism. Have you ever looked at someone else in your own line of work and thought, I'm not as good as them, or as worthy of my place as them? I know that I have. So to follow up on Jodie's quote there, Meryl Streep actually said on this same topic, you think, why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? And I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this? Unquote. And my point here with this, and I've made it before, is that you cannot be a mind reader, so don't even try. It's going to get you nowhere. The human brain has got a negativity bias, so you will always think the worst. The sort of people who most often suffer from this syndrome include perfectionists who set extremely high expectations for themselves. I would have put myself in that category. Experts, in inverted commas, who feel the need to know every piece of information before they start a project. Soloists who feel that they have to accomplish tasks on their own, and if they need to ask for help, they think that means that they are a failure or a fraud. And then there's supermen or superwomen who push themselves to work harder than those around them to prove that they're not imposters and feel stressed when they are not accomplishing something. I think I was definitely one of those for a while as well. It didn't end well. Do you think that you might fit into one of those categories? Just to remind you again, they were perfectionists, experts, soloists, supermen or superwomen. Try and avoid falling into those categories. And why do people suffer from imposterism? In an article in Time magazine by Abigail Abrams, we discover that there's no single answer. Some experts believe that it has to do with personality traits like anxiety or neuroticism. Psychologist Audrey Ervin focuses on family or behavioural causes. Sometimes childhood memories such as feeling that your grades were never good enough for your parents or that your siblings outshone you in certain areas can leave a lasting impact. People often internalise these ideas that in order to be loved or be lovable, I need to achieve, says Ervin. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, unquote. And her imposter cycle is described as follows. First, they'll become anxious, which can only make them spend too much time on the task or procrastinate and then rush to finish it. Once the project is done, they'll feel relieved and accomplished. And that feeling of relief when a project is over is definitely something as well that I have experienced many times. And as I'm nearing the end of this series, which has been a very, very tough series of shows for me, 18 shows, which I had tried to make 5 minutes long, which you might have noticed ended up being at least full length and quite often longer than my standard episodes. So this feeling of anxiety that I have now is extremely heightened. Anyway, that was the first one, anxiety. Next in this cycle, it continues as these people won't accept positive feedback. And then the final stage of the cycle, which will begin again, is that they will ignore the fact that they could actually be smart or talented, insisting that they got lucky or just worked a lot without having real skills. They don't think that they deserve success, which creates more anxiety, so the cycle repeats itself once more. Imposterism takes what we all know as self-doubt and it magnifies it. I'm trying to be careful not to drift too far from this topic, so I'll leave more general issues about confidence and self-belief for another show. But if, however, what I'm going on about here is something you think applies to you, then don't panic, because there are simple ways that you can start to overcome it. First things first, remember, everything doesn't have to be perfect. Remind yourself that your best is good enough. And as I said on that episode in Perfectionism, this is not a that'll do solution. It's accepting that you're good enough can be really very good indeed. Next, talk to someone. You're not alone. I've been researching this for a few days and I can say that without exception, everyone that I've spoken to about this has recognised it in themselves. Share what you're feeling with trusted friends or mentors. People who have more experience can reassure you that what you're feeling is normal, and knowing others have been in your position can make it seem less scary. If you want to delve more deeply into these feelings, then just seek out a professional psychologist or get some talking therapy. There's no shame in that, and it is affordable, as I said a few episodes ago. I think it was the affirmations episode. Despite what you think, this sort of talking therapy is affordable. Having a really strong support system and getting ongoing feedback that validates your efforts and outcomes is important for improving confidence levels. Lastly, believe in yourself and acknowledge your achievements. Take recognition for the work that you've done. Treat yourself and then move on. I've mentioned this before too, and it's part of what is known as the cycle of productivity. A different cycle to the one I was talking about a second ago. This is the cycle of productivity, which is the opposite really of what I was talking about. But part of that cycle is acknowledging and celebrating your achievements. If you miss that part out, then you're burying your accomplishments in the past. You need to recognise your success and the failures from which you have learned, and you need to celebrate them. Try writing down lists of your achievements, of your skills and your successes to demonstrate that you really do have concrete value to share with the world. When it's there in black and white, it just can't be denied. Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Grapes of Wrath and many, many others, John Steinbeck, also fought feelings of inadequacy. He said, "I am not a writer. I've been fooling myself and other people." And in the back of that quote, I just want to say before I finish up here that you can still have an imposter moment. You just can't have an imposter life. If today's topic has resonated with you, then I want you to begin to understand the power of your attitude towards yourself, how you perceive yourself, how you talk about yourself, and how you represent yourself eventually becomes a reality for you. And this is a huge part of productivity too. Self-assessment is an essential skill to develop if you are trying to improve yourself. Simply observing your thoughts as opposed to engaging them can be helpful. So try and ask yourself, do these thoughts help or hinder me? That will make you aware of how you actually feel. And if it happens that you're putting yourself down, belittling your worth and making light of your talents, then you will come across as self-effacing, low in self-esteem and almost a part of the wallpaper. You will also come across, I believe, as I did myself at some points, as a pushover. So your call to action today is to take a few moments right now to celebrate your victories and achievements. Take this further by identifying a specific time each week where you can look back over what you've achieved and celebrate it each and every week from now on. Don't miss out this crucial part of the productivity cycle. If you've got a diary, write it in there. Write My Achievements as a title and schedule 15 minutes to look back and think on them every week. If you don't do this, you are setting yourself up for a much harder journey ahead. And that 15 minutes that you commit to this, and it might take less, are more valuable than having 15 minutes of spare time. So don't just let them slip away. They are important. That's your call to action. Okay, and I'll just remind, I went off on one there. So take a few minutes right now to celebrate your victories and achievements and get your diary out and write every week. You can do it as a repeating thing if you've got a digital diary. At a specific point, maybe on a Sunday when you know it's quiet, take 15 minutes to look back over the week you've just had and celebrate your achievements from that week. It will help you to be more productive. It's not easy to do, though. Forcing yourself to take 15 minutes out when you could be watching TV. I know all the things, the distractions that are on, but this is definitely something that's not going to take you much time and will benefit you in a big way, productivity-wise. Actor, comedian, and time-travelling international man of mystery Mike Myers says, "At any time, I still expect that the no-talent police will come and arrest me. If that sounds like you, then I hope that this episode will guide you to a better place." Today's show is sponsored by the Dave Bullis podcast, and if it wasn't for that show, I can honestly say that I probably wouldn't be here today, because I've been listening to Dave's shows for a very long time, though. His was the first show that I ever listened to, and I really got into it as I went to and from many a fight gig, and they've certainly taught me a lot and inspired me to do more, not only when I was making films, but as a podcaster too. His episodes are incredibly informative and engaging, and he has created a body of work which is really very significant. Sadly, though, this hasn't timed in too well for him, as at the end of this year, and Dave did sponsor the show possibly prior to this decision being made, but at the end of this year, he will be taking down all of his shows and stopping his podcast. And it's my hope that they will be repurposed and re-released in some way, but as for now, you only have a few days left before they will disappear, so I urge you to go and get listening and download them, because you will not be able to listen to them, I believe, past the new year. And in Dave's very last show, he recommends this show, Film Pro Productivity, and Alex Ferrari's Indie Film Hustle, and to be recommended in that sort of company and from someone that I respect so much, I am very, very thankful to you, Dave. And I just listened to his final show just a week ago, and it was absolutely incredible, where he does interview Alex Ferrari and he gets just gold dust for filmmakers. So if you are a filmmaker and you plan specifically to shoot a feature in 2020, I am ordering you to go and download that final show right now. And while you're at it, download as many as you can, in fact, because once they've gone, you may not be able to get access to them again. And I'll link to the Dave Bullis podcast in the show notes, because I'm not sure that it's on Apple Podcasts anymore. It might already have come down from there. And if you want to listen to it, I believe you may have to go to one of the other platforms. I know that he hosts it on Podbean, for example. But I'll link in the show notes at this point to this. Go and check out Dave's show. It's awesome. Next week's show will be a retrospective look over the past 50 episodes with a top 10 productivity tips section and a good bit of advice for moving forward into this new decade too. Please join me for that and for another 50 awesome episodes yet to come. And so let me end today with the words of Roy T. Bennett, who wrote The Light in the Heart. Believe in yourself. You are braver than you think, more talented than you know, and capable of more than you can imagine. Now take control of your own destiny. Keep on shooting, and join me next time on Film Pro Productivity. The music that you can hear right now is Adventures by Ihumitsu. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com. You can follow my personal account on Twitter and Instagram at fight_director, or follow the show on Twitter at filmproprodpod, or on Facebook at filmproproductivity. Please support the show by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review.